his kids are grown up and doing so well.
What about like the journals and like books and
They, Isabel took about 6 months to 9 months after he died to archive everything. So they're building an archive.
That's huge.
Great. It's amazing.
Only 6 months? That's a lot of work.
Saved everything. So.
Oh. So let's do a City of Gold interview too.
Okay.
After you don't mind, huh, McGuire?
I mean,
You
I
got
don't
nothing
mind
else
at
to do. You got nothing
My
else to do.
producers might mind.
All right, we are on the Festival Daily Buzz, taping at Treasure Mountain Inn at the top of Main Street in Park City, talking films about Sundance that are at Sundance and Slam Dance. My name is John Wildman. I'm the editor-in-chief of FilmsGoneWild.com with my Bitch Talk team, Angela Tabora and Erin Lim. And on this segment, we're going to talk about the documentary Food and Country, screening at Sundance. We have with us the director, Laura Gabbert. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. I know we've got questions because we love this movie. Why don't you introduce our audience? They have not seen the film as yet.
Okay, yeah.
Tell us about Food and Country.
Yeah, I will give you the top line. How about that? And then we can get deeper into it because it covers a lot. So Food and Country is essentially a film about the people behind our food, right? The people who grow and make our food. And for Ruth Reichl and I, who we collaborated on it, she's she's written for food about 50 years, former New York Times restaurant critic, editor at Gourmet. She came to me and was very concerned about what was happening to our farmers and ranchers and restaurant owners at the very beginning of the pandemic. We talked in March 2020. And I had been thinking about covering something just about restaurants. And she said, Laura, it could be devastating for the entire food system. And it's also going to really lay bare what's wrong with our food system. And there might be an opportunity to fix it, right? Or we might be left with a completely industrialized food system. So she took it as this sort of moment to want to record as much as she could. So she went out and she just reached out to everyone she knew, and one person would lead her to the next person. And because it was early in the pandemic, we just decided to record the Zoom calls, thinking that it was more R&D, right? Like, because at that point, remember, we didn't know how long the pandemic was going to last.
Oh, a couple weeks. Yeah, exactly.
So like, let's just start and see what happens, right? And then went on and on and on and on. And so we started getting some remote shooters to go out and shoot safely. And once we each had one shot in our arms, we got our crew together and kind of went out and really spent time on the ground with this group of people, about 10 characters. Actually more than that. In the editing process, we went up and down, of course. So, long answer, but...
No, that was perfect. And you and Ruth teaming up is just such a powerhouse team. As our listeners hopefully know, this is not your first film about food. We had you on Bitch Talk about 6 years ago for City of Gold,
right,
on the late great Jonathan Gold.
Yeah.
And now you're going from very micro to macro in terms of the food industry. Yeah, so talk about kind of the overwhelmingness of just talking about restaurants alone is already a lot. And now you're talking about everything that is encompassed in what we eat.
Yeah, and I think that was obviously, won't surprise anyone, one of the challenges of making the food. How do we focus it? What's it really about? That's what you're constantly asking as a filmmaker. What is this film really about? And we just decided to really tell this story. We had to kind of do this panoramic, story where you jump all over the country, because that's what Ruth was doing in the pandemic. She was talking to people in Georgia, and then she was talking to people in Nebraska, and then on both coasts, and she was trying to connect the dots. And yeah, the hardest piece was like, we're taking this sort of snapshot of a system that has been hobbled, right, by really bad policy making, intentional bad policy. It's not, people like to say these things were sort of unintended consequences. These were conscious decisions people in power made about our food system, right? Which has just led to a complete consolidation, right? So, which has happened in so many other industries as well. So it's kind of a story about that, at its essence, right? Yeah, and then, there were lots of decisions. Do we include this storyline? Do we cover this issue? Are we going to get into immigration? Are we going to get into, the history of tipping? All these things, right? So, and I think for us, when we felt like we had landed on things that, I'm sure food policy people know all about this, but most Americans don't really understand it. Whenever we had aha moments, we were like, okay, I think this has to be on film. We're going to take a little detour, and we're going to do a quick little history of this, and then we're going to go back to our present day characters and current day stories unfolding.
I love Marcus Samuelson, so thank you for adding him. And also, what a nice surprise to meet Karen Washington during this filming. What did you learn?
Who's arriving today?
Oh, okay.
She's great.
All of our subjects are going to be here.
Oh.
Oh, sorry.
We
Okay.
need to add some interviews
Sorry.
someday.
And they haven't met each other, and Ruth has only met a handful of them in person. So they're all going to meet tonight at our condo, which is really beautiful.
I
Amazing.
have so many more questions. But can you talk about urban farming and what you learned about it through this process?
Yeah, I mean, Karen Washington is an interesting example because she is a farmer and activist, right? And she's been doing it since the 80s. She was like way ahead of her time. She had one of the first urban gardens in the South Bronx. She has a farm in upstate New York that she uses for educational purposes, but also to grow food and bring it back to her neighborhood in the South Bronx and show people and educate people about what good, nourishing food is. So her mission is largely educational, you know. And yeah, it was just kind of, you know, I think a lot of us, that's something that I learned during the pandemic. I didn't know the history of black farming in America. I mean, you know, white farmers controlled 98% of the farmland, and that used to be the case, and our government systematically took that land away from them. And before that, we took it away from indigenous people, of course. I mean, so
It's a theme.
it's a theme. Yeah.
The film offers a fascinating dichotomy of a vast array of people that gave me great hope in what they're doing, whether farming, ranching, urban farming, even Ruth, and yet also being so frustrated on their behalf, going, we need to get them help. We need to get them some freaking help.
Yeah.
I would love for you to talk about, which you started touching on a little bit, kind of wrestling this darn thing to the ground, and how you started, and not knowing if it was just what kind of film this would be, and how, because there's so much information for us to take in, and yet it's also a call to action documentary. So it's not just a history of, and here, but it's also, we need to fix some stuff.
Yeah.
We still can. So talk about that process of mapping out the timeline of your documentary, either dropping in footage or changing midstream.
Okay.
Talk about that.
Yeah, I think every filmmaker says this about their films. This was an incredibly difficult film to edit. It took us a long time with breaks in between for raising more money and reassessing, and do the Zoom calls work? Is it cinematic enough? I mean, my gut from the beginning was that I thought there was something actually special that happened in the Zoom calls, because once you are liberated from that traditional model of the one camera in the room with lights and making sure the room looks pretty, it's a whole different tone and feeling, and we have these sort of spontaneous conversations in the moment with Ruth and a farmer face to face, week to week or month to month. So as soon as a farmer learns that perhaps they didn't get a contract, we're getting the immediate reaction, whereas in a more traditionally made documentary, you might get that months later. And have to say, what did it feel like when this happened, right? So there was this kind of, I was like, we have to lean into this. Like, let's not be afraid of it, right? Because people are like, oh, Zoom in movies is a killer. And it is hard, it's like, it's not particularly cinematic, but I feel like it's emotionally cinematic, right? Because you get these kind of very personal, intimate conversations. But that's not answering your question. So.
but I loved everything that you said.
Okay.
Yes.
And then the process for editing was really just, we had a 4-hour cut in the beginning because we have other really wonderful characters that we wanted to include. Even some of the characters that are there briefly, like Brandon Jew and Marcus Samuelson and Nick Kokonis and Grant Agatz. They had amazing storylines, and we just had to hone in and like get it to be about 100 minutes. And that was just really cutting and recutting and trying it with this character and then taking it out and then saying, well, can this character handle this character? And can a character appear once in this film? Does that work? Are we breaking a rule? Okay, because we had that rule in the beginning and we're going to break that rule for these two characters. It just was a process of just seeing how it felt, right? Because I really wanted this film to be not a sort of policy-driven, graphics-oriented film, right? Because, and those ones are great, we need them, but because Ruth was there talking to these people and connecting with them, we wanted it to be more emotional. Like, you want to get to know Lee Jones, you want to get to know Angela Knuth in Nebraska and how she's dealing with her husband and her sons, and you want to, like, so we tried to, like, give just enough context, historical context, without, like, too many facts and figures. Because I think that's what changes people's minds, right? Is like caring about those people and being like, oh, wait, okay, I get my vegetables here. Let's see, where does it come from, right? Because 80% of the food in our supermarkets is grown and produced by about 4 or 5 companies. Right.
That was startling to hear, and I believe it was the rancher that was saying the meat industry. 2 of the 4 leading companies are not even in the States.
Yeah.
That was, but I'm glad you brought that up because I did love hearing from the farmers and the ranchers because living in a big city, we're big advocates for restaurant workers' rights and tipping well and safety in the kitchen and things like that. But the farmers, they live such different lives from us. Yep. It's so nice to see that it's so much more than Republican, Democrat. It's like, no, they just want to put food on the table and work hard for good products.
I mean, I honestly feel like, at least one of my takeaways, and I hope other people's have this takeaway, is that this is a bipartisan issue. Like, once you start talking about food and how it's grown in this country, I mean, unless you're talking to Cargill, or like, but if you talk to people who are actually making it and growing it, people in the red states and blue states agree. It transcends that stuff. We have staunch Republicans in our film, and you find that Ruth and these characters just connect because they share the same values about, paying people properly for the food they grow, right? Taking care of the land, and making sure, people have nutritious food to eat.
Well, I would say, again, this is one of those documentaries that's enlightening, fascinating, sometimes very frightening. And I, as someone who does a lot of regional film festivals, I hope you will have an extensive tour with this thing.
Oh yeah, I know, that would be great, right? Like all over America.
Absolutely,
Exactly.
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's absolutely.
Absolutely. Again, the title of the film is Food and Country, which is screening at Sundance. We've been talking with the director, Ruth Gabbert. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much. This was great. Really
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
Flirt.
All right.
All right.
Yay.
Can I do a quick
So
thing?
much, yes, I love that. It's so nice to
Yes.
see you all. I know, I was like, oh good.
Yes.
I'm looking at her list, I'm like, I like this guy.
Yeah.
We like
We're
you
like,
too.
we have to, we must.
That's one of our favorite interviews. It's like in our probably top 10. I would say.
Jonathan, you and
I
Jonathan.
want to go back and listen to that. I haven't listened to that. I'll
Yeah.
do that. I'm glad you reminded me of that.
It was just a lot of loving on him,
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll take
Over
a
here.